there's a specialist which can look at interaction between a wife and a husband with no audio. They just wants to watch a conversation between them. And what they pick is if there's ever disdain, eye rolling, a smirk, that whole thing. And they said the moment that exists, they'll say that marriage won't last.
For somebody considering working with their husband or their wife, what are those one or two things that you must know?
Ask yourself how much you respect someone. Because if you don't have that...
From dance floors to boardrooms, Ashley moves culture forward. Now let his insights move you to act.
Some part of me thought, okay, well, if I'm interested in people, maybe I should do psychology. So I ended up going to uni and doing a psychology degree. But then, disappointingly, when I finished it, I remember thinking, I don't know if I want to be a psychologist. There's something about this that isn't right. And every marketer / graphic designer will know this. Everybody thinks they're a graphic designer and a marketer and have an opinion because, it's much harder for us to have an opinion on medical things. We don't usually go to the doctor and they say, listen, you've got gout. And you go, oh, no, doctor, I don't think so. I actually think I have, etc. You don't do this, right? And then sometimes go, oh, it's just girls doing social media. Do you know what I mean? The missing of the macho and everything else. Mm-hmm. And Emily had to work a lot to counter that, to be taken seriously. And obviously has done a brilliant job of it. But why?
Ash, thanks for making time. Thank you for inspiring me to start a podcast. Love what you do, but love how you speak with people and find out lots of deeper meanings and things that other people can use. I've seen you wearing many, many hats. At the core, who is Ashley?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on here. Second of all, what's my royalty percentage cut that I'm going to get from a successful podcast? Hopefully it's at least 10%, right?
It has to be. It has to be.
We'll ink that later on. Who else is that there to call? So I think the funny thing about that is that I do wear many hats, or at least it seems like it when I think of all the different things I'm involved with. But actually, all of them are connected in one way or another. And really, it's just one hat that perhaps comes in different colors without getting too kind of strange here. Mm-hmm. So they're not very different things. All of them have to do either with things that are creative. A lot of it, if not all of it, has something to do with communications, like the way that we deal with each other. And then there's this element, I guess, of trying to exactly work out human beings, and whether that's through music or design or marketing strategy or social media, ultimately all of that is linked. So if I think of who is Ashley from a professional perspective, I think it's someone that wants to find ways to creatively communicate with people for some purpose, whether that be personal, like the podcast that I run, where I try to figure things out on a personal level, whether it's to do with work, that it's engaging with consumers, that's the social media side of things, or whether it's, for music, where you're kind of hitting in particular genres and trying to align people to that. So, yeah, I think I'm a communicator, but someone that just really believes in the fact that humanity and us being humans is actually based on the fact that we communicate. And we communicate very well. And if we can do that in a creative way, all the better for it. So I think that's probably the professional answer.
If you look at a timeline, how did that communicator build up skills, a thirst for understanding, and a passion for doing what you're doing? What does that timeline look like?
It's funny. I think in some ways, life is partly a plan and partly a fluke. How much of each depends on various things. And the reason that I'm saying that is if I think back to, say, for example, when we come out of school, and at the time we believe that we might know what we want to do, but actually most of us don't. And we're in fact just trying to research out what it is that could be a potential path for us. So if I think about it that way, at school I was already interested in art. I was already interested in English, despite it not being my first language. Definitely liked modern history, but I think that was more to do with trying to learn from the things in the past and trying to understand why humanity ends up being the way that it is. So I could already see a beginning there, but realistically, I didn't know. I knew that I was very much interested in music and writing music at home, but that was just me playing on a synth. To my dog at the time, there was really no big vision behind it. And I think those were the kind of like basic ingredients. But then some part of me thought, okay, well, if I'm interested in people, maybe I should do psychology. And so I ended up going to uni and doing a psychology degree. But then disappointingly, when I finished it, I remember thinking, I don't know if I want to be a psychologist. There's something about this that isn't right. And maybe what it isn't, and now that I think about it in reverse, is there's not enough creativity in psychology. Now, I don't mean that the job is not creative in itself. In fact, I spoke to a psychologist recently, and it's fantastic the way that they think and how they help people. But perhaps in the creative sense of more generic things such as design and music, obviously that's not really involved in that. So I'm thinking, how can I mix this up? And then I remember being kind of attracted to the idea of advertising specifically in the way that advertising mixes psychology in some way with design. I thought, this will be kind of cool. So I ended up doing a master's in marketing comms and then pull that together with the view of working in an advertising agency. So you can see how this is all happening. And by the time I was working in an advertising agency, having finished those degrees and everything, I was already designing at home, working as a suit, as they called it at the time, in an advertising agency. So that's the strategy side of stuff, or accounts management. And I was still writing music, and got into DJing. So all of it started fusing. At that point, it still seemed like different things. But as life went on, I could find ways of melting that together. And with that, the realization came that actually they're all linked. And whether I'm DJing to a crowd, whether I'm writing music with a particular audience in mind, or at least I'm trying to express something, whether I'm writing marketing copy or whatever it is, all of those things are connected with this idea of actually trying to connect with human beings and using that in a creative way. So partly by design, partly by a fluke. There's jobs that I did get in my life. I never woke up one day and said, I'm going to be a head of marketing at the NGA, at a gallery. Sounds great, but I never really thought that would happen that way. An opportunity came at the right time and, I was there to take it. So I guess it's kind of, partly design, partly by a fluke. And here we are. Who knows what's next?
There is a plan to, when I think back and look at somebody that I loved in the marketing world, I think of Rory Sutherland from Ogilvy and the way he dissects behavioral psychology into most things. Yeah. And I'm going, that's fantastic. You have a background in psychology. You're now working with engaging audiences. And isn't that the primary role of a DJ? When you're playing music?
It is. And taking your requests.
And taking your request, right? And making it sound like I'm playing your song, but I'm playing my set and your song fits into my set. Yeah. What are some of the interesting journeys in your time at the NGA or your time in other marketing areas that you have found psychology in particular to be helpful? Whether it's designing a campaign or managing a team?
I don't think there is actually a day, even outside of professional things, that I don't use something that I learned from the time that I was doing psychology and times past when I read into things and so on that haven't kind of come into practice. Even this conversation here, not that I'm thinking about it in current step, but there's something to the way that we're relating to each other, open hands, face to face, trying to connect with you, all of those things are partly what I was educated in. So I think that's always been part of it. But if I think about it really openly, anything that has to do with trying to change a mindset involves a fair bit of psychology. So even if we think of the NGA, when I got there, the National Gallery of Australia's audience mostly, and actually a lot of museums and galleries suffer from this, have quite an older demographic. That in itself, of course, is not a bad thing, quite on the contrary. But where I came from is I said, why is it that we wait till the later part of our lives to realize how important, entertaining, engaging art actually is? And there's reasons for that, and there's psychological reasons too. People need to go through the motions of busy lives, find the time to be able to invest it. Most of that happens when kids are gone and all the rest of that, right? We also learn things through life, and art ends up being this kind of language that we all share a little bit later on. Not for everyone, but for a lot of people. And so my kind of claim to it was, well, could we live that the way it is, but shift the needle so that we're attracting a younger audience? And automatically then you're applying psychology. You go, all right, let's say I'm in my 20s, mid-20s. What is about the NGA that would put me in there? Because the idea of a gallery probably won't. But what if I present art in such a way that it actually makes sense to their lives? Whether it's for the benefit of inspiration, whether it's for the benefit of taking a break from the social, real, digital world out there and having this space, whether it's for being understood or playing with a particular idea, whether that be indigenous culture or whether that be modern art or depression or whatever else. All those things are discussed in art. So it could be something quite helpful and insightful. So in that particular instance, we started pitching campaigns in a way that would move towards a younger audience rather than an elderly audience in order to breadthen that, right? To provide breadth to that. And also the reason for that was not just so we can get more customers in or clients or viewers or attendees and sell more tickets, but rather I knew the impact of being exposed to art relatively early on in life. That kind of impact that has later on in life is actually really beneficial. So why not give that to people? So there is this altruistic aspect to it too. So you can see how, from a psychological perspective, you're looking at psychology as the means to understand why people make decisions, how they can change, and therefore how you fit in that change process. But also from a psychological perspective, what the benefits are of the thing that you're selling, essentially, which in that particular instance is exhibitions and art and attendance to a gallery. So yeah, it was used all the time. And that's a pretty good example, but I think that pretty much anything that we do across all the social media stuff that we're working on at the moment has the same thing. You're really trying to say at the end of the day, why would somebody care about what you're saying and what action do you want them to do and how does it benefit them? And if you can get into their lives and their heads, so to speak, you will make the communications, the product, the offer much better, more relevant, more engaging, rather than just cookie cutter approaches or pushing something out. So yeah, psychology is a great thing. And by no means am I great at it. I mean, I did undergraduate psychology degree, started a postgrad in psych before I moved over to the other masters that I told you about. But even at a basic level, I think that was enough to give me everything that I've got. And it's just really useful.
There are lots of fantastic marketers that go into government sector organizations and grapple with things taking time, having to do lots of briefings, having to convince senior exec that a change, a pivot is a good thing. What was your journey like, purely from the perspective of learning that it's not a linear, easy, I've got this idea, it's happening tomorrow, so that people can get a little more perspective of what that is?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, just before in that example, we're talking about, changing behaviors of a particular audience, right, in terms of the NGA. That's just one problem. The other problem is, saying, essentially making sure that people who are in your organization or that you're working for also understand why it is that you're doing the things that you're doing. So then you're communicating to them and trying to sell them on that idea and trying to bring them across on the journey. And actually, the third one that I'll mention, and every marketer / graphic designer will know this, everybody thinks they're a graphic designer and a marketer and have an opinion because, it's much harder for us to have an opinion on, I don't know, medical things. We don't usually go to the doctor and they say, listen, you've got gout. And you go, oh, no, doctor, I don't think so. I actually think I have, etc. You don't do this, right? You trust professionals. But when it comes to marketing and stuff like that, everyone has an opinion. And that's okay. I mean, in some way, it kind of makes it more fun because it's easier to engage people because in some way they've already have an opinion. So you can bounce off that, agree with it, challenge it and everything else. But you're right. The strange thing is that the audiences that you're dealing with is not just the marketing problem and the audience out there or the challenge, but also the people that you're working with. So you're right. And what I tend to find is, I think in many ways, it comes down weirdly to you as a person. And what I mean by that is, if you have a lot of people in the room and you're trying to provide them with an answer or solution to a marketing problem, depending how they feel about you and how you communicate that, how excited you are, committed to the idea, how you can bounce challenges back and forth, is how you'll sell them on it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I've learned over a longer period of time that the way to diplomatically find a solution that's best for the customer, for the organization and the audience, even though it might be hard to swallow for a team that's used to things being a particular way, to do that you could do a wonderful presentation, but if you don't do it with the right personality, you'll probably lose the people. And even if I take it out of marketing for a moment, my experience, especially in corporate organizations, I have seen people who are exceptionally intelligent ruin things based on the way that they have a lack of empathy or emotional intelligence, how they deal with people in a room, how they just don't go about it the right way. And I'm thinking, wow, if you only had that gift or were able to work on it, you would get so much further. Now, I don't know, perhaps I'm not the most intelligent person in the room. I'd say I probably am not, but I try to find means by which I connect with people, engage with them on a personal level to enable those ideas to be understood, digested, and usually supported. So it's weird. It goes down to personality, I think.
Yeah, and I love the perspective of your example of the doctor. I had an opportunity working in a telecommunications company in India and Sri Lanka where jingles are big for TV advertisements. And this particular company called Airtel, which is big in India and Sri Lanka, had Shah Rukh Khan as their brand ambassador and A.R. Rahman composing music. And it was owned by this magnate who owns a lot of steel in India called Sunil Mittal. Had gone to see the new jingle for Airtel Sri Lanka and had feedback for A.R. Rahman on his jingle. A.R. Rahman gets up from the piano and we're all looking, going, what is going to happen here? And he says, Mr. Mittal, I love what you do and you're brilliant at your business. You need to respect that I'm the best at music. So this is your jingle. Thank you. And he walks off. I think there comes a point in life where you can do that if you have built that reputation, but otherwise a lot of patience, a lot of resilience is important. I think emotional intelligence also for someone who's brilliant is another important part of it, because you don't want to go in there with lots of arrogance and then miss out on the opportunity to actually progress your idea. In that same line, you've worked across galleries, but you've also worked across universities. How do you define success for a marketing campaign from what you've seen in the years of work you've done?
Well, it almost doesn't matter who you're working for. The good news is that when it comes to successful marketing campaigns, there's really kind of three aspects of it. Every marketing campaign has an end goal that's usually customer driven, meaning sales, mostly. Of course, there are campaigns which are to do with awareness or particular messaging, social issues, etc. But for the point of this conversation, let's just say that in most cases, someone is trying to sell you something, right? That's what marketing is. And I'm really making this basic, but hey, And so therefore, if marketing works, the sales work. That's basic. But if we go back a little bit, good marketing is also exceptionally efficient. So that you're spending the right amount, meaning the right balance between the investment and the outcome, then you're doing a good job. Now, that can be backed by many things, and there's more data than ever available out there. And there's also, it's easier for us to understand how our campaigns are resonating and all the rest of it. So with that in mind, the success of a marketing campaign is you can see it almost in real time, whether it's resonating and whether the money that you said you would pour into it for best practice is actually giving you the results. So that's that. And of course, there's one step before that, and that is how proud of it are you as a marketer? Did you do something different? Is it cool? Is it exciting? Are you proud to say that this was your work? And actually, I'm probably driven by that more than anything else. Not that I should really admit that, but driving around Canberra for all these years, or walking around whatever, and seeing some of my work, this is probably very very me, right? But I see something and I go, I did that. And I can see people are looking at it. And I still really like it. And I hope people do as well. And it's not always about pleasing everyone, just like good art. It's about to start conversation rather than just be this thing that everybody likes. But ultimately, there is something that drives a person in marketing, usually when it comes to things that are creative, that the work that they do is visible. There it is. And so one of my favorite things, for example, working at the university was, I'd be watching the news and cooking dinner, and then one of our ads would come on and would catch me unawares. And there's this moment of a couple of seconds where you're like, what's this ad? Oh, wait, this is ours. but you've tuned into an ad without knowing that it's yours. All right. And then you see it in context of other ads and you think, yeah, that works. The music that I chose was for a reason because I wanted to sound different. There's a bit of silence at the beginning to break it. All these tricks, that you can use. And I'm like, yeah, this is great. And I feel proud. And then I look at how it's resonating and then ultimately asking, has it got us the results that it has? And you compile all that together. That's true success.
And from the outside, for somebody looking at it, if you look at it carefully, you can see, yes, there's an organization and a brand, but you can see the personality of the person driving it very, very clearly. Not saying that something's good before and after and all of those things. You can definitely see the vision of the person driving it forward.
And that's cool. I mean, I was going to blow my own trumpet here a little bit. But
do it.
Why not? But what was really nice is after let's just say a year or two at UC, and, we did quite a concerted effort around repositioning that university. Somebody was working with Emily. They had no idea that I was at UC and working. And they said, I'm an ex-UC person. I've just been seeing their campaigns. They really got it together now. I'm actually proud to say that I used to go there. That campaign is working really well. Like, they've got the branding spot on. Anyway, Emily comes home and tells me this. And I'm like, that is literally the best feedback I could have gotten. Now, this person happens to be quite good at marketing, so on top of that, it's not just a normal person's opinion, but somebody that also has a critical eye of these things. And I remember thinking, wow, okay, that's probably the biggest accolade I could get, when that happens. And it also means that they've gone, yeah, we can see Ashley's work in that. Now, they didn't know that, but that's really nice. You're very right, by the way, about that there is a stamp of the creator or the agency for a brand of someone else. So much so that all organizations that I've worked for, I've tried to bring in all creative and marketing in-house so that it's our stamp, it's organization stamp, including UC. I did the same thing at ANU, something at NGA. Because there's something great about trying to have as much ownership over that as possible. And it's interesting that I could look at some competitors in the field who would run out these campaigns and say they did that through an agency. I just know the person that's behind the marketing effort of that particular organization, they wouldn't have come up with this. I just know them from meetings and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Check in, of course, they use an agency. Now, that doesn't mean that the marketing's bad or anything, but actually that's somebody else's idea that you just happen to veto and go, oh, yeah, we like that one. Now, that's absolutely fine because the purpose of that agency is to provide the best advice, and that is probably the best solution for that company or that organization. But yeah, you're right. There is a stamp, some kind of identity of the creative within different people, and you can actually see that when it's presented onto another organization, another brand. But I think in most cases, unless you're working in the field, you probably won't pick up on that.
Yeah, it's a strong tell. You definitely can see it. All right, next we're going to jump into your podcast, the Behind the Bio podcast. It's been running for 5 seasons, if I'm right? Over 100 episodes. Tell me, what has the podcast taught you about people? Or let's start with, what has the podcast taught you about yourself?
Right. Oh, wow. Actually, I'm going to answer them the other way around so I can think about that one. What it taught me about people, I think the thing that it taught me is that I had this hypothesis, right, that no matter what field you're in and who you are and what your upbringing is, that actually the paths that we take professionally are actually not that different, in the sense that even if you're lucky in your career, there are time of struggles. Most people at some point have doubted whether they're doing the right thing or should they do something else. And not everybody has a vision of knowing where they want to go. In fact, it's kind of unlikely. So in other words, there's an evolution in careers rather than, you start at the beginning and you go, I'm going to be up there by the time I'm 60 and blah. So what it taught me is that it's 100% true. Even people who externally would seem incredibly successful and on a professional level will eventually, during that hour conversation, open up about some struggle, whether it's a personal one that has impact on the professional, whether it's a professional doubt, inferiority complex, whether it's something else that almost fell over, whatever it may be, whatever those conflicts are, we all have them. And what's great about that is we've should feel okay when it happens to us, or that it's happened to us. So we shouldn't go into, I had this, really difficult period in my profession where I just couldn't find myself. That's absolutely fine. In fact, you needed that to be able to find yourself in the future, or perhaps that might happen. So what I wanted to do is give people the idea that we are actually quite connected, despite all these different branches of careers and everything else. And what it's taught me is that the hypothesis was true. We are. We're actually not all that different if you line all of us together, and there's something quite comforting in knowing that everyone struggles, but that everyone can succeed, and they're always changing. And also, I think the other thing that it taught me is that idea of change. We can either be agents of change ourselves, and the idea of us listening to a podcast and thinking, God, I was always really interested in psychology, and listening to that gentleman who is a psychologist, I didn't know that's what it was. And actually, maybe I should go and do a degree and maybe get into counseling. The idea that you can be the agent of change after hearing somebody else's professional life and what their day-to-day looks like. Or you can let it being life, give you opportunities and just move you across. So you don't have to be that active. Because it's interesting, life will throw things at you. You just have to kind of figure out whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing, and whether that's okay or that's not okay. And some people love just being kind of taken by, the stream as if they're like a stick kind of floating. They love that, and that's great. But I guess the thing is, you've got a choice of what it is they want to be, passive or active in it, and choose the thing that works for you and go on. So I think it taught me those things. Now, what has it taught me specifically? I guess I wanted to know whether I have the ability to connect with people who I don't know. It's not that easy, especially if, you stick me in a room full of people. I might seem relatively extroverted, but truthfully, I find large crowds slightly overwhelming. If there's like a lot of people talking to each other, I'm trying to figure out, who do I know? And then when I do know them, I kind of stick to them. I worry about the fact that I don't have that ability just to cover an off-the-cuff conversation and just not sound shallow in the process, the kind of small talk that's really not doing anything for anyone. And I guess I wanted to know whether it's possible for me to have somebody sitting in front of me for an hour or so that I don't know and keep the conversation going, keep them engaged, make sure that my audience is getting the information they want. And I think what it's taught me is I can. And there's a very simple, not a hack, it's a very simple thing to do. And it comes down to the fact that anyone is interesting. And if you know how to ask questions, there's always a good story. And I think that's the thing that I got progressively better at as I went along.
Do you do lots of research before your podcast? Do you try to find out about the person? What's the process like?
Yeah, I'm trying not to do too much research, and for a reason, because I don't want that to skew what I'm going to ask. And even it's interesting, the questions you showed me for this, I quickly had a glance at them, but I was trying not to think of what the answers would be, because if then I do, then you can tell that I've pre-thought this, and it's kind of more interesting when you do it off the cuff, I should say. So what I tend to do is look at the professions. I go, what are you in? And say again, the psychologist, So I had a quick look at them and thought, great, they're in a private practice, which is interesting. They've been a psychologist a long time. They work in various fields. That's all I need to know, because I can start a conversation from that. And the most basic conversation is, did you know that you were going to get into what it is that you're into right now? And it's interesting. Most people say, oh, no, actually, it's a funny thing by mistake, So, I try not to go too deep. That's for the conversation more than anything else.
Who are your favorite podcasters, and what have you learned from them?
Yeah, right. It's interesting. Will Anderson, a comedian.
Yeah.
He's probably the first podcaster that I listened to quite a fair bit, because I enjoyed the fact that he was talking mostly to comedians. And I guess I really liked the insight into comedians and how they think. So that's one part of it. But he was very good at almost pulling the personality out of that person. So the next time I saw them on TV or whatever else, I could understand where they're coming from and where their comedy is coming from and how much they've thought about it and why it is they're saying the things that they are, That's that aspect of it. And the other thing that I really liked, the more I listened to his podcast, the more I actually learned about Will. Now, he's famously relatively shut off in that because that's not about him, but he still can't help it. And you get this insight into who he is as a person. And then I had the opportunity to actually work with him quite a few years ago for something that we did at UC. And it was strange because I met him thinking, I know more about you than you think to listen to a podcast. Anyway, we started talking and I said to him, I actually enjoy that by mistake, so to speak, you give things away about yourself. It actually makes the podcast more meaningful. And he said, yeah, that's really nice to know. I didn't know that was the case, and I'm thinking, great, I picked up on something here. So I very much liked the way that he was doing that. You're just looking at the personality and also the content and the story. So that's one thing. Then there are a number of scientific podcasts that I listen to. Now, the interesting thing about that is that I probably like these particular people, so say someone like Andrew Huberman, by the means in which he explains scientific things. He could easily lose all of us in a conversation and I'd be like, what are we talking about? But he manages not to dumb down, but to break down scientific knowledge in a way that I can listen to for 2 hours that he's talking directly into a microphone and come out at the end going, I think I got like 75-80% of that, and more than enough in terms of what I wanted to understand about health or whatever, longevity and whatever that may be. So I think I really enjoy that style of people who can break down complex things into not dumb things, but quite engaging bits of information and take you on that. So you feel more equipped, more enlightened by the end of it. So I think people like that. A lot of other podcasts that I listen to tend to be news-based. Mm-hmm. So they're short form, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, so on. Again, probably for the reason that I feel enlightened by them, but in a way that's not too deep, but deep enough for me to gotta go, and it's interesting, I'm getting what's happening here, and I can do some further research or look at some other opinions somewhere else. So it's mostly those kind of things.
100+ episodes means you must be enjoying the podcast. When I thought of getting into a podcast or starting a podcast, there were many mental blocks I put in place for myself. And I looked at the numbers. There's about a 5 billion person audience for podcast, but the top 15 podcast gets 65% of that audience globally. So you think of Joe Rogan and whoever else. That's where the audience is. But I'm sitting and thinking, that's not what success looks like. For me, success looks like, can I learn to speak better? Can I learn to ask better questions? But also, I'm probably a little too old to go into university and start a university degree now. This is one of the most amazing ways that I can learn from people who have chosen a field, who have worked in that field, and who have seen the ups and downs of it. So from that perspective, I'm defining success like that. How do you define success in your podcast?
Well, look, I think when I look at the numbers of the people that listen to each episode, and it's interesting because podcasts are a slow burn, especially when I'm banging on for an hour with someone. So if I had a shorter podcast, it's more likely to be picked up, right? But then again, I couldn't quite convert a conversation to the depth that I needed to within that period. So an hour or so usually tends to work quite well. It's quite nice to see that a podcast might be listened to by, say, 100 people. Doesn't sound like a lot, but you think of 100 people sitting in a room, listening to a conversation in full between me and somebody else. That's a really captive, large audience as far as I'm concerned. So to me, success is knowing that somebody's listened all the way through their podcast. And I can see the numbers on that. And they change over time. Like I mentioned, a slow burn. So what happens is people will listen to a podcast when it comes first. Some people listen 2 weeks later. Some people a few months. Some people jump around between different things. So there is a bit of like a scale. And if I look at the older podcasts, they tend to be the kind of the largest ones because people keep on catching up on them. But, they've got a couple of hundred listens each, perhaps up to 300 or so. Again, if I think of 300 people that have listened to a conversation between me and Andrew Barr, to me, that's a great audience. To me, that's success. The fact that I'm getting feedback out of people who, recognize me somewhere and say, oh, by the way, I listened to your podcast and I loved it. And they'll pick off individual ones between different people. So they'll go, say, for example, they're into music. They said, I've listened to all the ones they had something to do with music production or DJing or whatever else. Absolutely loved them, and I'm thinking, success. I've enlightened that person. They've learned something about my guests, something about the process, the career, something they can take away with them, and probably something about me in the process, which is really nice because, they can say hello and know me a little bit better. So, yeah, I think it's the fact that, people are actually listening. I know that sounds kind of like such a basic answer, but I'm not looking at domination by any means. I'm just looking at a captive, engaged audience that listens all the way through and, gives me good feedback.
Let me also delve in to see if you've heard from 100+ episodes. Has there been any criticism? Has there been any sharp pointed feedback that you have taken on board and that you have worked through? And what's the process for taking on board something like that?
Yeah, honestly, no. There's never been negative comments, which is interesting because I was expecting those. I was expecting for someone to disagree with somebody else, or I don't know, especially people who are in politics. I was thinking, here we go. I had Tara Shane on, just a lovely conversation. I'm thinking, this will be interesting. I mean, she does represent a particular side of politics. I know that Canberra's quite progressive and left-leaning, so I guess there's maybe a little less friction there. But the podcast goes beyond Canberra, obviously. So I was expecting something. Nope. There's something, I think, quite respectful about people tuning into our podcast thinking, well, I'm really going to hate that person. Am I going to really listen to that? I don't think that's the audience. So out of those 100 people, again, I tend to think of 100 people that actually wanted to come and listen to this, as opposed to people who are randomly listening to stuff and then go, oh, I hate that, or that sucks. I think there is something, maybe going back to the conversation about success, that you're getting the right people listening to you. And I think I do have an audience that's very right, because if they don't like something, they're more likely just not choose that particular episode and go to another one rather than listen to it and then complain about it. On the flip side, though, probably the worst critic is me. Sometimes I listen back to some of them and think, why do I speak like that? Why did I say that so quickly? And how come, I said that there? We tend to be our own worst critics, and that's quite okay. And again, you learn from that. But I don't have to listen back to a podcast to learn from it. Once it's finished, I also know, I didn't do that very well. Just a moment ago, I forgot what I was actually answering, right? Because I was thinking about two things at once. And I'd probably go back and go, geez, Ashley, really? It's a simple question. And, you got yourself stumped. So, we tend to be our own worst critics. And if I was my own troll, I'd probably be saying, go slower and ask better questions. And why are you talking for so long in this bit? But that's me. And that's my own, idea of self-improvement and so on. But no, I've been very lucky that I haven't had to deal with it. But could it happen? Yeah, it could. Am I ready for it? Yes, I am. The way that I'll probably do it is it a valid conversation? So if someone puts a point about, I don't know, a policy that they're talking about, and somebody says, yes, but I disagree, that's okay. That's what it's meant for. If it becomes personal, we're out. And I delete the comment because that's not what this is about. So I think, it's easy for me to say that maybe because I haven't had to do it. But I think in my mind, I'm quite clear about what I would find okay as a conversation and what I would find not. But like I said, most of them have been really positive. Actually, they all have been really positive. So I haven't had to deal with anything particularly bad.
Not to sound selfish, but for me to learn about podcasting, you're one of the best. That I have seen you do it consistently, but I'm also sitting and thinking and reflecting when you speak to go, oh my God, I was thinking, so I'm going to record this podcast and then I'm going to start getting letters of demand for people saying, take this down and take this, that. And all of those things, I'm sitting and going, I've got a government job. So how and when do I get the notice that I'm fired now for doing this thing? And it's all of those mental blocks that we create for ourselves. And I reached out to somebody who has a large platform who gave me some amazing perspective. I'm very, very grateful. I'm intending to speak to this person one day, so I won't name the person's name now, but it was fantastic feedback. The feedback was 2 lines. It says, when you get started, you won't be good. You will continue to improve. And don't worry about it, mate. No one's listening to your shit podcast. um, get better, and then start worrying about how you can get better, how you can ask more interesting questions, how you can engage the audience better. And I think that perspective is really, really important, because I know lots of people want to start things, but we come up with so many mental blocks and so many challenges. And I love the framing of, yeah, somebody can say something nasty, but if you want to know the things I say to myself, none of those really matter. Ash, how and why, how long do you want to continue with your podcast, and what's the inspiration for it?
Yeah, how long? I don't know. You know, the funny thing is that podcast was only supposed to go for like 12 episodes, maybe, 12 episodes. And I'm sponsored by Super Curious, which is an agency here in Canberra, which is amazing. And I remember when I pitched it to them, I said, I want to talk to 12 people. We'll do it like once a month, I remember Jamie at that time said, let's make it fortnightly. And, why don't we do it for 6 months and see how it goes? And that was 5.5 years ago or something. Because I realized there's a whole bunch of people that you could talk to who are very interesting. It's almost limitless in Canberra. And also Canberra's very connected. So it's very interesting to keep on picking people off from different professions. And like I said, people are listening. So I'm like, well, I'll just keep this going. For how long? I don't know. It all depends on, I guess, demands of other things, whether it's children or whatever it may be, or perhaps that I'd like to get some sleep one day. But I think it's... If for the time being, I'll keep this rolling and we'll see how it goes, because there probably will be a moment where I might go, I think we've heard enough stories. That could be one thing, but knowing myself, what might also happen, and this has happened in some creative projects I've done, is you could keep something going for a very long time, but then you ask yourself the questions, why? Could this be different? And when I started getting that thought, I realized that's the beginning of the end. An example I could give of that is I used to do the Home Stories, which was a photo and written essay around people's homes in Canberra. That ran for like 5 years, if not longer, maybe 6. And then sometime around that 5th, 6th year, I started thinking, I should be doing this as video. We should change this up. Could have that gone on forever? Of course. And it was really successful, fantastic in terms of the reception that I got. But it was time to do something different. So we parked that, and a year later, we came back with the Look-In, which is now all video-based and what have you. And I'm really enjoying that same-ish idea, more about the homes, less about the personalities, which offers some creative freedom around what we do and when. And yeah, so I kind of think what might happen is the question that I'm asking through Behind the Bio and the things that I've learned, there might be a moment where I go, I think we're done, and come up with a different idea for something else. That could still be a podcast, but in a very different format. And I think when that happens, I'll know it's the end, and then I'll probably move to something else.
Let's talk about the Look-In and the Home Stories, because I'd love tagging along with you for Home Stories. It was fun. I loved your perspective of how you engaged and what you wrote and how you showcased a house that's actually somebody's home, and they've styled it, they've made it theirs. And I think you do something very, very similar with the Look-In. Also, audiences feel like they're there with you.
Yeah.
How do you craft a home story?
Personality. So you're very right. And actually, right at the beginning, we were talking about the hats and how they're all about human communications and creativity. Really, what I'm doing is telling a story. And a home is actually really nothing without a person inside it. There is no way, like you were saying, that, for example, a creative person who does some artwork for an organization, that there isn't a stamp of them in that work. There's also no way that once a person moves into a home, even if it's been styled by someone else, that within a short period of time, it becomes a stamp of them. So that's what this story is. And even if I don't get to meet the person that's inside the home, and quite often for the Look-In, I might be presented with the home by an agent, because the person who owns it may wish to remain private, which is actually mostly the case for various reasons, or there might be away or whatever, right? I think, okay, that's great. But the home still has a personality, and that personality, if you look at it, reflects the people that lived there, one way or another, right? And so there is a story within that, and that's what I'm trying to pick up. So I might be talking about features, it has 5 bedrooms, whatever else. but look at the way that they've used the wood here and the way they've combined things. And look at this styling. And not only does it tell the story of the people that live there, but also usually of the architect or the interior designers and what they had in mind. So it's interesting through what seems to be a dead space, I mean, objects in a room or whatever else, you're actually pulling out the human element out of that and saying, see, we as humans make this worthwhile and make it have meaning. And I think that's the key. So the difference in that is, I think if you come at it from a real estate perspective, so say if you're selling a home, you talk about features and you go blah, 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 and you're saying, imagine yourself there, you could live in here and could look at this alfresco dining, etc. And you're talking about features that way, but it's not actually about the personality of it. Now, there'll be some people who will say that's actually not true, but I think the way that I'm coming from it is because I don't have an end goal of selling a home. I have an end goal of saying, how interesting is this? Look at somebody else's home. Look at the way they've designed things. Think about how they feel in there. Now think about how you'd feel in there. And if you were living there, what would you change? And we're then communicating with ourselves, through this idea of homes and architecture, which is kind of fun. And by the way, I've spoken to a couple of architects and know some, and people who are grand developers, like, the FKPDs, for example. And they actually say that the most important thing in anything that they do is thinking about how humans will interact with that space. Because ultimately, who cares what a building is unless there's somebody in it, that whole thing. And I guess that's the one coming from. How's my perspective of seeing a home? Can people feel that? And is theirs different when they look at my content? So yeah, very much the human being in that space is the way that I try to craft the stories.
And it's sometimes more than the storytelling arc, it's the different characters. So the architect has built it with some skill set, with construction, and now the real estate agent is going to sell it, but you come in and tell the story of it. And most of the time, yes, you look at the building and you look at the plans and all of that, but you connect with a story for a home. What have been some of the more interesting homes that you have seen that have taught you about someone's personality that you didn't expect?
Yeah, sure. Probably the best way of thinking about it is this. There was a home that was built in a very specific way, which from an engineering perspective was quite difficult. Imagine essentially two gigantic slabs of concrete placed on top of each other with a home in between, right? And not only from an architectural engineering perspective, that is really something else. Expensive build, looks amazing. But then I was thinking, why would you do it? Like, why didn't you just not have a normal roof? And so what I was trying to figure out in that story is that there is something that the person living in that home, who commissioned the design and everything else, wanted to represent. And I quickly realized that actually it's linked to who they are as a professional, which is an anesthetist. And this idea of separation and cleanliness, and that kind of almost, not coldness, but most certainly that kind of like brutalist nature of it somehow reflects the work that they do. And I don't want to get too deep on this, but you think of, putting someone to sleep for an operation, they're a human being that's laughing, talking, in pain, whatever it is, and then they're asleep. And they're almost technically not there. Now, I don't get too philosophical about that, because even at that conversation, I asked the anesthetist, do we still exist in consciousness when we're out? And he's like, she's like thinking, actually, I can't answer this question for you. And I'm like, So I don't want to go that deep, but there is something about that separation, right? And I realized that perhaps, the home represents that kind of austere, cold, very calculated place. But she's the human with her family inside that. So, it's amazing. And what was really amazing about it is me looking at how people perceived that. I thought, will people like it, or will they find it too intense, too cold? And it was beautifully split. There were people who were saying, that is my favorite place. That's amazing. How do they even do that whole thing? There's other people saying, I could never live there. It's like living in a gallery, or a hospital or whatever else, right? So it polarized people, which I really like, because it's a fun conversation. But it's a really good indication of yeah, that human element and that human story and that reflection of all those other things onto home. So yeah,
And suddenly we gave two slabs of concrete and a building a character.
correct. And once again, if that person wasn't inside it and that wasn't their profession, that home wouldn't have that story. It would just be a architectural feat, pretty interesting engineering. But because she was in there, everything changes about it. And you kind of think, how interesting.
You've got so many, not hats now, I have understood. You've got so many colors of the creative hat.
Yeah.
Tell me about DJing and music. What's the core difference between them? Or they one connected arc where one is you're playing to an audience, you're playing at an event, and the other one is your creativity, your storytelling in music? That's how I see it. How do you see it?
Yeah, well, I guess DJing is more about delivering some knowledge of music and curating that for a specific venue and audience. It's as simple as that. And there's a relationship between you knowing that audience and that venue, and then in curating music that fits that experience. That's what good DJing is. So, well, at least in my experience. Whilst the music production side of things is by far more personal thing. That's my music, my emotions, my lyrics. They're usually collaborating with a vocal artist, creating that and putting that into the world. Now, do I play my own music in my DJ sets? Sometimes, if it's the right thing. Though I actually weirdly don't like it because then end up criticizing it against in context of other things. I'm like, oh, should have made that a bit louder and so on. It's actually kind of annoying. I don't hear it the way other people do. I wish I could. But yeah, it's a very personal thing. And I think the audience that I have, digital mostly, rather than through me performing that stuff, is an important audience, but I can't see them as well. I actually don't know who they are. And I know the numbers and I can see where they are. And I would presume that people who like my stuff like disco and soulful house and kind of new soul and all those kind of things, or indie soul stuff. But ultimately, I don't know. And it's almost interesting not knowing the audience. Whilst when you're DJing in a lounge or a bar or a venue, you can see the audience right there. I know who I'm playing for, and I can also tell whether it's engaging. And then they'll come up and say hello and what's this song and etc. So it's real time. Whilst the music production, it's personal, and then I let it out there, and I'm thinking, I hope this mysterious group of people that like my stuff or things like my stuff enjoy this too. So yeah, very different approach and a different way of looking at it.
Canberra has many, many perceptions, most of which may be incorrect. But Canberra has a perception of not having a nightlife. Tell me about some of the nightlife venues that you played music at, and what have been some of the fun experiences?
Yeah, no, look, it definitely does. The reason that people say that is, I guess, we've got very large cities, you'll have more clubs. So people go, oh, there's joints everywhere that I can go to, whilst Canberra's always been a little bit limited in that. But the truth of the matter was, no matter what you're into musically, even subgenres of things, you will find nights and the people and the music, and you'll be able to find it. So I think Canberra's actually really great in that respect, because it's easy to connect with people because it's small. And yes, might not be tons of us, but that's probably enough to have a good time listening to whatever it is that we like. If I think of the evolution of, dance music and everything else, in many ways I've been exceptionally lucky that when I got into dance music was when it was still not underground, but most certainly nothing on the commercial scale that it is now. Now, what's great about that is it was kind of cool to go out to a club that was playing house music because all the other clubs are playing R&B or pop. And all of a sudden you're thinking, yeah, this is a different vibe. There's something unusual about this. I'm into something that isn't mainstream. And then you'd see the same people and you'd all be vibing on that culture. So it ended up essentially being a subculture. And if I think of places like Hippo, that was one of the first ones, and then Lot 33, and ultimately Trinity and Academy, and it kind of grew from there. Over the period, as dance music became more pop, more commercialized, started branching off into different areas, what that really meant is that Canberra's kind of changed with that too, and the bigger clubs started to playing, music like that's house and what have you. And so I've been very lucky that I've kind of gone through this whole entire journey where it went from being a subculture And I might as well admit here that I think in the 2000s I used to go raving, like proper raving. I'm not talking about the fact that you can go to a warehouse festival right now, but the kind of thing where a flyer would come out and you'd have to call a number that would tell you what the location is 30 minutes before the event because it was in some Fishwick, warehouse somewhere, and it was just a pop-up rave, that kind of thing. So, I was at that level of it, which was just fantastic. And they kept on growing and growing, and you grow a bigger audience, and more things come out. But ultimately got to the point where it is now, where there's lots of bars, lots of venues, and lots of clubs and lots of stuff. The positive side of it being more mainstream is that it offers more opportunities. So where before you could only pretty much DJ maybe at one place, and if you're lucky at a rave or whatever else, now there's bars, lounges, pubs even, etc., that will kind of want DJs to play particular music to their audiences. And that's kind of nice because that means you get more of an opportunity to do that. So I don't know, in some ways I think I've been very lucky through that journey and as everything kind of moved through. But Canberra's never disappointed me. I've been managing many venues for a long time, but I've also managed to kind of see most of my favorite artists in Canberra at some point. Most of them, and not very often, but that's not the point. I got to support internationals here and everything else. So Canberra's been very good to me, and I'm sure it's been very good to many other people who are into dance music in its broader sense.
And understanding the size of the city and our population, I think, is the important context there. Like, you have something huge, you might not be able to consistently fill.
Correct.
And that's then a question of sustainability for that business also. Moving towards your music production side of it, it's a wonderful platform to illuminate vocal artists or local artists or indigenous music sometimes. What are some of your favorite collaborations, and what does the making of those collaborations look like?
It's actually relatively straightforward. So I can't sing, which is pretty obvious. So what I have to do is I have to rely on musicians, especially vocalists, to provide the vocals. And so what usually happens is I've got a whole bunch of friends who sing, so I can just reach out to them and say, look, I'd like to work on a new song. How would you like to do this? But also find new people all the time. People come out of the woodwork, so to speak. They might put a song out, or we might be connected through someone. And I'm like, hey, love your voice. I do this thing on the side as a hobby, not a professional thing. Would you like to work on something together? And the way that it usually works is they say yes. And then what I tend to do is put together the structure of the song, maybe lyrics sometimes. I find most of the time vocal artists prefer writing their own lyrics because it's easier to exercise particular notes and whatever. So I'll write the song almost like an instrumental and say, how do you feel about this? And 99% of the time they go, love it, this is great. And they come back with some lyrics, come over to my place, record the vocals, then I mess around with the whole entire thing, and then we've got a song. Sometimes, actually recently, someone's come to me with a basic song they wrote on a piano, and they say, I would love to turn this into a song. And I'm like, okay. And so, I do the arrangements and everything else, we record the vocals, and then here we are. So it's very much, it's I do this bit, you do this bit kind of scenario. And it works really, really beautifully. It's just been absolutely great.
Who've been some of those local artists that you've had the chance to work with, but you've engaged deeply with their stories?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I probably didn't answer the previous question about kind of the more interesting or challenging ones. Actually, the funny thing is, without saying who the artist is, there is one particular male vocalist that I work with. And I don't know whether, again, it's a fluke or whether this is the thing, but I've realized that my favorite songs out of all my songs that I have, or I'm kind of most proud of, have usually been done with them. And I don't know whether it's a connection in an emotional sense or whether they most truly represent my kind of inner monologue, if it could sing. Maybe that's probably the best way of presenting it. And there's one particular song, again, I won't say which one, which I'm very proud of, and it wasn't even like a major single of mine, but very personal. And even now that I listen to it, I'm like, yeah, that's I know exactly what I was thinking at that time, and I can feel that come back to me every time I listen to that song. And there was something in their vocals, and I don't know whether they're just good. They're very good at what they do, or whether they really got me and they said, I'll sing it in the way that Ashley's thinking about it, and therefore it's such truth in the way that it resonates. So I don't know, but it is an interesting thing that there is something about that mix. But then again, you don't want that all the time, because I don't want a collaboration to be just an expression of what I want. The great thing is that as a musician comes in and says, for example, there's a musician called Andrea Cohen. She's actually from Canberra. Such beautiful, soulful vocals. I don't care what she does as long as she does it. There's never been a moment where she hasn't come over, done a song, and it hasn't been brilliant. And the fact that it's not the way that I think about lyric writing or melody writing, that she's so gifted at it, that I just want that, So if I told her and said, oh, what if we do this thing? It'd be half as good as what she can do, probably even less. So you want a collaboration to actually be a great mixture of the best of your skill sets. So yeah, it's interesting. It can go either way. It can be something that either represents me very well, as that male vocalist did, or something like Andrea does, where she's just such a pro that, she just throws magic onto any song. I could give her like a drum beat with one piano and she would create something amazing out of it. So you can go either way.
What's the process looking like? So if I break that down, does it involve you getting to know the vocal artist and then speaking about a track, speaking about a vibe, speaking about a mood, and then putting something together? Or is it a lot simpler than that?
Try not to do that. It's a little bit like these podcasts, where I try not to get people to prepare too much. And also remembering that I don't have a particular vision of the exact outcome, because if you do that, you end up forcing tracks into sounding like, I don't know, some hit. So you want that magic to happen for you, where some things just come together and go, I didn't even know I was going to do that. That's great. That magic of the process. So I usually say, oh, look, I'm trying to make this a bit like a 90s vibe kind of house classic. How do you feel about that? Great. That's all I really say. And then I let them do it. Sometimes they will say, oh, I really like this musician, everything but the girl. What if I sing it in that style? I'm like, go for it. So but it's very basic. We try not to preempt what it's going to be like and over-engineer it, quite on the contrary. And with Andrea, she didn't even listen to my track. She literally came over, listened to it the first time in the studio. And she goes, yeah, you got a piece of paper and a pen, wrote something down. She goes, all right, let's record. I'm like, sorry, did you just write that then? She goes, yeah, no, it's good. Let's record.
That's musical genius.
So I go record, and she starts doing the ad-libbing, verse, chorus. She goes, how do you feel about that? I'm like, well, we're done. And she goes, I'll give you another two just in case. And I'm like, what? There was a song that I wrote with Chanel Cole, and she came over and she didn't, I thought she was actually doing the proper recording, but she was just practicing. And she goes, I'll give you a demo and then I'll come back in a couple of months. But I didn't know that, because when she only sent it to me after we spoke way later, she came over, recorded this demo, and I'm like thinking, this is the best thing I've ever heard. So I've made the song, produced it, put it out. And then he said, oh, wait, I thought that was going to be the demo. And I'm like, that was perfection, and it's still probably actually one of my favorite songs. So it's funny how it works, But of course, a really good professional sometimes will have greater vision of what they want than perhaps what they're giving in a demo. Whilst to you and I, the demo is the best thing ever. But also like something about the fact that it's so raw and almost imperfect in a way that makes it really great. So yeah, definitely not over-engineering stuff.
What's the financials looking like for a music producer in terms of how do you keep that passion going? Is there enough there to keep young music enthusiasts interested?
If we're talking about money, there might be enough probably to buy a pizza once a month.
Right.
No. So I put it this way. I've made a decision that music production is going to be a hobby. And so I don't think, not that I spend a lot on studio gear and so on. I mean, it's really a laptop and a good synth, right? But I think all the revenue that I've ever gotten out of songs, whether they were used as jingles for something or what have you, which is probably where the money is as opposed to anything else, have gone into me purchasing that gear. It's definitely not anything that's a sustainable income. Now, saying that, that's because that's what I decided. Could I have made it into a career profession? Probably if I kind of went along with my DJing, kept on going to the club circuit, did festivals, attached a song to my name, try to get an agency to represent me, sure, it's all doable. But I specifically didn't want to do that because I knew one day I'd be sick of doing nightclubs and I didn't want my career to take me to somewhere which I would regret. But is it possible? Damn straight it's possible. It comes down to talent and super hard work. But even if you think of Safia, Peking Duck, Aston Shuffle, there's others I'm sure that I'm missing out on here, if you know, from Canberra. They're all successful. They make a living from that. They're massive. And that's because they've got talent and drive and the knowledge in the business and how to make it. So it's definitely possible. It's just a lot of hard work. And I guess you just need to know that you're the right person to do that. And in my decision, the right person is the gentleman that sits at home after hours and writes music with friends and puts it out to this mysterious audience.
A hobby and the passion of the hobby, do people, in your opinion, lose it once you commercialize it?
Yeah, I think so. It's almost like my DJing too. That's a professional hobby, I would probably say. If it became my only job, I think I'd probably start resenting it, because then you're chasing things and it all just becomes the work, and you'd probably say, well, I'll do any gig as long as it pays. I don't know. Like, I was worried about it becoming a job. And there's a difference between a professional hobby and a job, because a professional hobby you control. You can turn it off, on, you can invest into it, not your choice. While a job has other parameters attached to it. You've got people relying on you making that cash or being there or whatever else. So it's a different level of responsibility. And I think the beautiful thing about hobbies is that it's at your pace and in your leisure. And again, if you've got the drive for something, you will do it. So yeah, I think hobbies are a great way of providing something else in your life that you can do without all the pressure that usually comes with a profession.
Ashley, tell me about how you think of brand and creative strategy when you're in front of a client. And I'm asking this question from now having spoken with you and understood better the creative hats you wear, but also who you are as a marketer, who you are as a strategist, how you think, how you connect with audiences. What are some of those initial questions you ask somebody who wants to build a marketing campaign?
Yeah, definitely. I think, even if I think of my role at Ivy Social, which is a digital social media agency, and the main point here is to understand the basics. And it's funny how often that gets lost. So the question really is not what would you like us to do for you, but rather what is it you're trying to achieve? And I know this sounds so basic, but people forget to ask that. What is it that the client wants to achieve now, short term, long term? And then you start to work out, I can see how we can be agents of help and change and what we're providing in that process. But you can also then quickly see where there's gaps in other things. So, somebody might have the best social media agency with a great product and a great vision, but the supply stuff is completely fallen over, or they won't have the resourcing to actually deal with the success of that, etc., etc. So understanding the big picture, it's not really that different from, having a good podcast for an hour, but it's understanding the person, the driver, and why we're doing this. And then going, right, now that we understand that, let's talk about the thing that we want to do for you. And really, again, before you even start talking about the agency and the processes and what have you, you go, now let's talk about the audience. What else are they seeing in that market? How are they going to perceive you? How does this make their life better? Whatever else. You're really trying to understand the human beings that you'll be talking to. So first you understand the human being that is your client. Then you understand the audience. And not just as numbers, because a lot of marketers fall into this, this ratio of this engagement, this audience demographic. That's great. Leave that for later. Think about the person. What are they like? What are the issues in their lives? What is it that you're trying to do? How does this all fit in? Because from that, you end up developing a persona, a personality. And that's the stuff that you start pitching towards. And you go, right, well, our creative strategies a means by which we're going to communicate, engage with them. So in order to do that, we need to do it in a way that's true to this particular brand, it's authentic, etc., etc. There's a benefit, it's quick to understand, but also is a little bit different and creative. And then you start pitching that against the personality. And if you get that kind of triangle right, that's what the gold stuff is, because you understand the client and how everything you fit you have fits into that picture. You understand an audience and who they are at a true kind of human level, and then you start communicating with them, and then, it goes from there. So I think that's probably what it is. It's understanding the human beings behind the commercial aspects.
Most large organizations have marketing budgets and plans and know when there is a gap. They might not know what the gap is, but they know when there is a gap. Why should a small or medium-sized organization, a Canberra startup, a small organization, why should a small organization be concerned about marketing and look to a marketing agency?
Because everybody needs help. And the truth of the matter is, you think of a small startup, a medium agency, they usually don't have their resources in-house to be able to do things. And in fact, they're probably better positioned to do the thing that they're meant to be doing, i.e. coming up with the idea, creating clients, whatever that may be, and allowing people with expertise to come in and help them. That's what it really comes down to. In a way, engaging a social media agency or a marketing agency is knowing that you don't have that skill set, but it's necessary to bring about success. So, the great thing is we don't tend to go out there and say, we're a social media agency, we can do this for you. Proactively have to sell people on our services. We're lucky, but through word of mouth experience, people come to us going, we've realized that we need you because we can't do this yourself, but you can do this for us. Help us get to this point. And so we then become the facilitators of that. So I guess the answer really is because most of the time people don't have those expertise and that skill set within, their family, their small organization, or even if they're startup by themselves, yeah.
For an organization like IB Social, how do you look for talent to work with you?
Yeah, and that's interesting. So it's funny because the first thing I'm going to say is fit. And I mean that generally personality fit. People who've got experience and fit are really, really valuable. It's not just the skills and the experience. So people can look great on paper. Again, the emotional intelligence is in there, the ability to deal with a client, to sell an idea, to deal with high-pressure situations. So I think the fit from an emotional, personal point of view, mixed with the right skill set is where you find the right people. And it also doesn't mean that they have to be the people that have already got everything with them and they just bring it to you and off we go. Sometimes you see potential and talent. And again, it comes into people who have got the ability to understand things at a strategic and a creative level, have an understanding of the personality stuff that we spoke about, and are in that industry for a reason. Usually not they just kind of ended up in it by mistake, but because they have a passion for it. And that passion usually drives them to be better and better. So it's just finding that sweet spot, I think, between, skills, personality, and the driver.
Might be a pointed question, but is there a type of client or organization you would say no to?
Yeah, there would be. And I think, and of course, this will be a question for Emily, who's the director of this as well, rather than just me. But two things. We'd never take a client who we don't believe actually needs us. I know this sounds weird because people go, well, geez, why wouldn't you? But if we feel that, like I said, the big picture is not making sense and the end result will not be that despite our best efforts because other things are not structured correctly, we will say no. Honestly, we'll say no. We'll say it exactly for that reason. So we can do this for you, but because this is missing and this is missing, you would be wasting your money. We would not get you the results ultimately that you need in terms of sales or engagement or whatever it may be. And we don't want to take on something that won't be successful, but we also don't want to waste your money. There's other things that you need to do. So that's one reason. And that's just being authentic and real about it. The other one is around obviously anything that might be contrary to our moral standings, clearly, whether it's gambling or what have you. I probably wouldn't pick up a client of that. If I say probably, I mean certainly. So yeah, that's quite normal. And, agencies have that choice. We also try not to go for things that are formulaic, if you know what I mean by that. So for example, pretty much any other agency could do, and it's essentially a bid or a tender, and you go from there. Again, we tend to work with people who actually want to work with us. So they'll come to us and say, we like what you do. We've seen your case studies. Could you help us? We tend to not pitch for work that's just out there in a newspaper or online, and you kind of go on to that way. It's just a different process. So we know where our fit is in the ecology of digital and social agencies and what have you. So yeah, it's also finding the right relationship. So what's really great is Emily's always had this theory about being the right size so that you can provide 100% to a client rather than, say, for example, getting, 100 small clients. We'd clearly rather have 10 larger ones and really pour ourselves into that long-term partnerships. And she's been very right, with the relationship level that we've got with clients over the last 6 years is way above benchmark in terms of people staying with us, which is amazing because they understand the long-term partnership value of that. So again, would we say no to a small cafe? Not necessarily, but I think what we tend to kind of find ourselves being perfect in is longer, more invested relationships and slightly larger projects.
What are some of the myths organizations think about working with agencies that just aren't true?
Well, it's kind of, yeah. Well, the thing is, some of them are true. I mean, both being on an agency side and not an agency side, and the reasons there are these kind of stereotypes is they come out of somewhere, all right? But one thing maybe I'll mention is maybe from a slightly different perspective. And I'm the only male in Ivy Social. It's most certainly a female-led agency in that respect. And by far, the first one in Canberra that was actually created as an all-female agency. So I've only joined recently in the last year. Which skews that, unfortunately, just by a little bit. I'm one of 10, so that's fine. But the interesting perception for quite some time was people would meet Emily and the people that she works with, and they'd sometimes go, "Oh, it's just girls doing social media." This kind of like they're just females. Do you know what I mean? The missing of the macho and everything else. Mm-hmm. And Emily had to work a lot to counter that, to be taken seriously, and obviously has done a brilliant job of it. But why? Why couldn't that be on the same level than a couple of males walking? And so that's really something interesting. Now, it happens less now because there's a reputation that comes with it. And again, people reach out. And now they're meeting Emily and the other people that have worked there. And sometimes I'm in those meetings as well. We no longer have to play that game. At least I never had to, obviously, because of who I am. But that's something interesting that is something that was a stereotype, which was, I think, quite false. And it was based on, I think, some perspective of a mixture of misunderstanding that social media and influencers are two different things and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it got lumped into the, girly business, and we can just push them around and tell them what to do. Well, in fact, you're hiring digital and social media expertise in an agency with full education behind them, degrees, lots of case studies. So yeah, that took a while to overcome, but interesting point in that respect. But a lot of other kind of stereotypes, they're somewhat true. I mean, creative people do wear t-shirts with slogans on them and all the rest of that.
And we like the freedom, we like timelines sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, that's, yeah, and different agencies are different, but maybe there's a misconception too that creative people tend to be very free and open. In fact, all the creators that I know are quite structured, and they're very good creative people because they know that this is deadline, this is the start, this is the delivery. So that's a lot tighter these days. But
tell me about the dynamics with working with Emily. How do you bring things together, but how do you also have a space to challenge each other's ideas and get the best for your clients?
Well, first things first, obviously Emily and I have been together for a very long time. I don't know how long because we lost count, but I think it's like 13, 14 years or something, right? So we know each other very well. That's one thing. Two is we've been in each other's lives. I don't like to bring, or didn't like to bring, work home, I mean, but she'd be great at getting it out of me. So how's your day? And what did that person say? How did that go? So she was kind of in mine, at least knew exactly what I was doing and how at a broader level. Then in terms of Emily's progression of Ivy Social and everything else, I was always across it. So I've always been in the background of it. I've always been a director of IV, just what we call an advising director. So we talk about things in campaigns and so on, and offer my advice, but I was not an employee of it. Clearly, I had my other professional things to look after. So that was a really nice way of kind of being in the background and doing things that way. So the idea of then shifting that up a notch so that I'm client-facing and a creative strategist there and everything else wasn't actually that much of a change. It's not like we were completely separated professionally and now we're in each other's lives. Really, that wasn't that much of a change. And I think to answer your question around how does this dynamic work, it works because there's respect. I would like to say that I probably respect Emily's professional intelligence more than my own. Really, she's super smart, and that's one way. Now she would probably laugh and go, "Don't be silly. We're equal." I don't think so. In other words, I down on myself more than I would on Emily. But I think, I don't think. I definitely know that when Emily looks to move my view on things, she respects my position. Doesn't mean we agree, and that's the point, that we're actually perhaps looking at the same problem from different ways, which is great because a client's likely to look at things in a different way too. So we challenge each other in that way, but it comes out of respect. And there's never been a moment where we've not met on some final solution and both of us are like, yeah, that's good. Because it takes in a bit of what you said and I really like how that is. And sometimes we say, you know what, I think your idea is actually better because if we do it my way, that's the danger of that, So we communicate, but it's based on respect more than anything else. It's funny, I keep on making the joke that now she's completely my boss in every single sphere. And maybe that's even true, and maybe that's exactly what I wanted all along. But I've always looked forward to working with Emily, and I think she's always looked forward to having me in the team front-facing, maybe because of the things that we talked about before, that idea of connecting relationships with people in a relatively short period of time, especially when they're clients. I guess I offer a slightly different perspective than Emily and of course the other people, the great team that we've got there. And she's like, yeah, this makes our agency richer. And that's what she wanted, that. And so as long as I don't fail at that and I pass probation, then everything will be fine.
Good. Look, you will pass probation. You should, right? You put in 14 years.
You think so, right?
How does that strengthen your relationship?
Yeah, well, I mean, like anything else, I think good relationships, especially ones that last a very long time, are based on the fact that you don't just have the good times. There's a whole bunch of things thrown at you. And how you deal with those stresses actually makes you stronger. So, the common thing people say is before you marry someone, you need to go on a long holiday. Why do people say that? Because when you're stuck together for weeks on end and there's challenges because you missed the bus or a flight, someone's sick, how you deal with that together as a team makes you or breaks you. And every time it makes you stronger. So I think, we've gone through a whole bunch of things and we're very lucky in our lives, but there's most certainly been challenges, mostly externally, if I can call them that, rather than anything between us, that we had to deal with. But just the way we've dealt with them, I'm like, this is great. Anything that comes of us, we can deal with it. Now, work is an additional thing because there's the challenges of a particular client, some financial thing, a challenge of maybe a marketing thing that we need to do. And each time we get through that makes us stronger because it's another thing that's behind us. So I guess what it's doing is completely and constantly adding to the strength of what we're able to do together, rather than those conflicts or whatever becoming an issue or becoming conflicts actually in the first place. Because it could quite easily be the case that, you're constantly, if you're arguing about something and then you're also arguing about work, just add to the things that could break you. But we use it as a positive rather than a negative. I don't think we've ever had we don't really disagree on many things. I mean, apart from apparently me being very annoying and I can be very childish at home, but that's home, so that's fine. We don't ever disagree on kind of things of that nature. So it actually just builds our professional expertise, and the challenges make us better people and better professionals.
I've enjoyed working with the wife for about 16 years on everything, and annoying and childish is what I get told all the time. I'm like, that's my superpower. Thank you. Fresh. I just hear fresh and kind and all of those things that I want to hear. For somebody considering working with their husband or their wife, what are those one or two things that you must know?
Well, I think go back to what I just said. Ask yourself how much you respect someone. Because if you don't have that, if you do actually think that you're better than somebody else, it eventually comes in between, you know? We were talking about favorite podcasts a moment ago, and we were actually, what I didn't mention was Diary of a CEO. And on that, there was a person talking about body language. And there's a specialist which can look at interaction between a wife and a husband with no audio. They just wants to watch a conversation between them. And what they pick is if there's ever disdain, eye rolling, a smirk, that whole thing. And they said the moment that exists, they'll say that marriage won't last until they even that out. Why? Because there's inequality of respect. So I think the one thing that you must know is, do you equally respect each other? And if you do, that's great. And if you don't, figure out why. Is it incorrect? Is it correct? Talk it out. Try to even it out because you need that together. I don't know what another thing would be, and it's hard because people have such different dynamics in their relationships. I think maybe the basic question is this: do you like spending a lot of time with one person? And the reason that I ask that is I knew from times where Emily and I have been together, well, if she had to go away somewhere, I would miss her instantly. In fact, we could have been gone for a holiday for 3 months together. Not that I've actually ever been on a holiday for 3 months. Maybe that's too long. But, we've gone out, for a longer period of time, hotels, all this kind of stuff. And then she had to go somewhere to work. And I'm like, I'm thinking, can she still be back in like 6 hours or whatever, 7 hours? But still, and I kind of figured I can't think of a time where too much time is too much. It's just not something that ever crosses my mind. We got stuck together in COVID. It's great. It's like spending time with my dog. I could never think I don't want my dog around, So I think maybe that's the question. Do you want that? Because if no, and you like personal space and the break from somebody, not that's just necessarily a bad thing. It's just the relationship you have, that perhaps don't put yourself in a position where you need to spend an additional 6, 7, 8 hours, whatever your work arrangements are, with your wife, because maybe that eventually will come to become friction.
Tell me about the next chapter for Ashley as a father. What does that look like? What are some of those things that you have in mind around how you prepared yourself for this chapter as a father?
Oh, goodness. The answer is I don't know. How have I prepared myself? A bit like the podcasts, I try not to, because I think if I have stern ideas about what should happen and that is not how a child develops, I'll either be steering them in the wrong direction or feel disappointed. So I'm trying to have some ground knowledge of what developmental things are, whether it's psychology or otherwise, nutrition, etc., but also not force it and watch how the engagement is going and what the child wants and, what he likes and what he doesn't like, because they're their own person, really. Yes, they're slightly Emily, slightly me, but they're really their own person. And actually, the way I prepare myself, and this might sound odd, is by exploring. And I found this weirdly, the thoughts would come into my head about my childhood and how I relate to my parents and stuff. And I'm thinking, why am I thinking about all this stuff? But the reason I'm thinking about it is I'm dissecting my past and what I've learned out of particular situations, and then thinking, if that was me in Eden, how different would I do that? What do I want the child to take out of a particular experience, good or bad or otherwise? And that's what I'm finding myself doing by preparation, is by looking at how perhaps, I started understanding the world, whether it's close friendships, social things, politics even, human nature, careers, passions, and think, what advice did my parents give me, and did that land well or did it land badly? And then I adjust it and think, right, when Eden comes to me and says blah blah blah, in my head I'll go, I responded well to this kind of answer, and providing the right amount of freedom with the right amount of guidance at the same time. But that's a pretty loose plan and very much built on the spot, as opposed to anything I've written down and gone, this and this and this and this, One thing that I will say, though, is I know out of the personality type that I am, I do like to control things. I used to be a commander. Now I'm on the borderline of architect.
Right.
I don't know if that means anything to anyone, but that's people who like kind of creativity but structure, and then look at reason and logic, as opposed to just emotions and what have you. See, even just then I said just emotions, discounting them a little bit. To catch myself doing that. But anyway, and so I don't know, like even maybe a very emotional child, right? So I don't want to then be discounting them saying, listen, don't worry about their emotions. They'll get you in trouble. Just think about reason and logic. That's not it. All I have to say is, hey, there's another side to this, but you go with what you think feels right. So I think it's knowing that my personality type can have a particular way of dealing with people. And I want to make sure that he is not just falling into my stamp, but rather I adjust that in a way that would be right for him.
Ash, I've always enjoyed working with you from a marketing perspective, loved your music, but I've also sat and reflected on every single time we've had the opportunity to chat. I've learned something new. Thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you for making time to chat with me on the podcast. If someone wants to connect with you, understand a little bit more of your journey, ask you about marketing strategy, where do people find you?
Yeah, look, that's easy. Social media, right? More than anything else. Look, you can do, Instagram, which is just at Feraude, Feraude. You can find me on LinkedIn, but that's under my not artist name, but I'm my real name, which is actually Alexander. Be able to find me on there. So yeah, either of those two will be absolutely fine.
Ashley, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Just want to say it's a huge pleasure. I really hope that everything goes very well with you. I've always learned stuff from you as well. And like I said in my podcast, you're one of those people that has done everything with a smile. And that actually means a lot because it just makes things fun, but also gives you this kind of idea that everything that we're about to do is going to be enjoyable. It's a really important kind of half glass full way of approaching things. And that's what I get from you every time. So thanks.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you.
Pleasure.
A massive thank you to Crown Plaza Canberra for hosting this episode of the podcast. If you are looking for really nice accommodation in close proximity to Canberra CBD, or if you want well-appointed meeting spaces, check out Crown Plaza Canberra. Thank you again.